Welcome to SEL in EDU.
where we discuss all things social and emotional in education.
I'm Krista.
And I'm Craig, and we are your hosts on this journey.
This podcast is created in partnership with Pennsylvania ASCD. Hello, SEL in EDU listeners. Craig and I are back, and we are thrilled to have with us Jodi Friedman. Jodi has 15 years of experience as an educator and advocate for social justice. As a teacher, elementary school leader, and professor, she has engaged in conversations and leading professional development around identity, race, privilege, culturally responsive education, and anti-racism in her public school, district, New York City, and beyond. Jodi was honored by the New York City Department of Ed with the Equity in Leadership Award in 2018 and was recognized in 2019 as the Culturally Responsive Educator of the Year Award by the Coalition for Educational Justice. This is absolutely phenomenal. I'm so excited to learn from Jodi today. In addition, she was also selected as one of 6 educators from across the nation to serve as a School Leader Ambassador Fellow at the U.S. Department of Education for the past 2 years, where she focused on unpacking the root causes of racial disproportionality in schools. Everyone, we're excited to welcome Jodi Friedman.
Thanks. Super excited to be here.
If only we were still recording these to put out on YouTube, you get to see.
That's hysterical.
So for those of you who might not know, in October of 2020, CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, revised their 5 competencies framework. And so we still have self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making, but they expanded the skill sets that came under each of these. And so, for instance, when we look under self-awareness, it's looking at honoring and understanding and knowing our students' cultural and social identities, examining prejudice and bias within ourselves so that we can better relate to other people, understanding social contexts and how that influences people's thoughts and actions and behaviors, learning how to stand up. Well, first of all, learning how to recognize when something is unjust and then how to interrupt that. And when we talk about looking at making responsible decisions, it's not just something that is responsible, but also something that's caring and ethical and influences other people. And so the work that you're doing, Jodi, is so powerful. And I'm really honored to have an opportunity to learn more about that. Craig, do you have any questions that you want to throw out to Jodi to kick us off?
Yeah, so Jodi, we are all carrying a great deal these days. And in our plight to ensure that our young people are highly educated but cared for. And I'm curious, how have you been caring for yourself as you continue to carry this incredible torch of leading in some of our best schools?
That's such a great question. We actually just spent the past 2 weeks meeting with every single one of our staff members for the beginning of year meeting to talk with them, not only about their professional goals, but how are they caring for themselves and how do they want us to support them in caring for themselves. And I'm the assistant principal, but my principal and I were literally just saying, we need to have this conversation with each other because our self-care is equally important. Because as the leaders, we have to have the energy to come back each day and walk in and start over and with excitement and energy if we want to be be there for our teachers and our families and our students. And many years ago, I was a part of the Con Fellows, where they really started talking to us about how as leaders, instead of talking about our staff or employees or our teachers, that it's the people in our care. And that really shifted how we thought about how we run a school and how we care for others. But then about 2 or 3 years ago, we realized that also impacts how we care for ourselves as the leaders, how both leaders care for each other and how we create time for us to kind of turn off. And so I would say over the past 3 years with the pandemic, it's been like this, right? Because there was times when we couldn't turn off. We had to do anything and everything we could to support our families and connecting and our teachers and getting these virtual classrooms going. But over the past 2 years, I think that we've set some firmer boundaries of like, what time am I going to leave work? And it might mean that sometimes I log in later, but not always. I've learned to like schedule emails so that sometimes when I have that idea that pops in my head, I know if I don't send it, then it'll live in my head when I'm sleeping. But I just send it to myself. So it lives somewhere. And then in the morning I see it and I remember to do it. And then I also became a mom in the last year. And so that kind of forced me to put some boundaries in that I probably wouldn't have put in for myself. But lastly, I would say a lot of my self-care comes from the communities that I'm connected with and the other educators who kind of keep my flames going and keep me excited and help talk me through things when things are hard. And so when I really think about care beyond just like time, it's like finding your people and your people who care for each other. And I found so many powerful networks of educators in different spaces where I think we really care for each other. And I can't imagine being a leader now without those communities.
Thank you.
I'm smiling because I know Craig and I have talked about this, and we follow the work of Brene Brown, and she talks about like her Avenger squad and her Square squad, those people that are in your corner who can lift you up, or those who can kind of just listen at where you're at. And then it's like they let it go for you, right? So it's a way of kind of getting it off your chest. They take it on and then let it go, so that you can keep moving forward, to be the leader that you know your staff needs and the people in your care need. Let me correct myself there. And then they can think about their students or the people who are in their care.
Absolutely. And I think even also finding the same people who are also going to challenge you, right? And they're going to call you in and hold you accountable, be like, hey, I know what you believe in. And like that didn't quite match. And sometimes that's hard, but that's kind of what keeps you going, because you know that there's people who care enough about you that they're going to hold you accountable for who they know you want to be as a human and a leader.
And I'm going to ask you, I caught on to what you said because it's a phrase that I like to use as well. But you said specifically call you in and not call you out. Would you mind talking a little bit about that? Because I think that change in terminology really shows how to keep somebody accountable, but with care.
Yeah. So I actually was just at a whole like think tank about the word accountable. And I think accountable, if you just wrote down like what it means, it does have good intentions, but it's actually in many places and spaces, especially in schools, been actualized in ways that could be very harmful and seem very negative and punitive. And in reality, 2 summers ago, I participated in a PD with like some folks I saw on Twitter who it was called Clear the Air. And they really talked about how like accountability is an act of love. And like that really, really resonated with me. And that if someone is taking the time, and sometimes it might feel like they're calling you out, but if they're taking the time to actually call you in and tell you something, that like you should see that as a gift. And that feedback is a gift. And like what an awesome opportunity for someone to tell you something that maybe you hadn't realized, and you have the opportunity to repair or learn from it or make it better. And when I started shifting, it was not an easy shift, don't get me wrong. And I still have to like remind myself of that some days when, conversations my staff has with me or families or other educators. But when you start really thinking about accountability as an act of love, it really helps to kind of bring down the barriers where you're not on the defense, and you can really listen to what's being said and think about what parts of those are you going to take in and can you learn and grow from.
Yeah. I think often that happens, and I'm thinking about times when people have taken time out to call me in. It's because I had a blind spot or something I didn't realize, and they didn't know what my response might be. And so it took a lot of courage on their part to say, this is what I saw and this is how I felt about it. And I just wanted to let you know. And so thinking about, it might not have been my intent, but their way of receiving that supersedes what my intent was. I don't ever want to be in a group where somebody's feeling badly because of something that I had done, intentionally or not. So
yeah, and I also had to sit with that idea of like, I think sometimes calling in or calling out, especially for me as a white woman, right? Like there's a lot of tone policing that can happen when people give you feedback. And you might be like, oh, I'll take that feedback, but only if you say it to me nicely. Only if you say it to me in a time when I'm ready for it. Only if you say it in a space where like I don't feel like I'm embarrassed. And I had to learn that feedback is a gift. And especially for me and the privilege I carry, I can't like put up walls, these rules about how I get feedback. And so sometimes that calling in, calling out, depending, can be used as like a little bit of a way to kind of be like, well, you can't tell it to me that way. And so I try to kind of work on myself about the accountability part and not so much how it's been being given, and really start to recharacterize it as a calling in. But sometimes it feels like a call out, right? And that's just because it's my own discomfort, but I don't want to kind of weaponize how the feedback's given to me, if that makes sense.
It definitely does. And I know that a lot of the work in that, the framework that you've helped create, the Culturally Responsive Sustaining Educators Guide, you talk a lot about the work needing to be done from the inside out. And I think that that is an example of that. We know we can control ourselves and change our thought processes and mindsets. And I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah.
And it's a constant process, right? Like I'm just thinking to myself, like I'm saying this out loud, and there's still days it's very hard, right? And so I think this idea that like as a culturally responsive and sustaining educator, as an anti-racist educator, like it's always work. You're never done. It's always taking conscious effort of moving in that direction, because the conditions are so embedded into our culture of work and our culture of our organizations that like it really takes a lot of conscious effort to do that.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, one of the things that surfaces for me as I think about what you shared, especially when people are receiving feedback. I think about Elena Aguilera. She's the author of The Art of Coaching. And she said, trust isn't built in a day, but we can lay bricks every hour. And so for educators who are listening to this podcast, who have been in space and time with you, and maybe have had an opportunity to watch you in your evolution and your journey, I'm sure they come with questions of, well, how did you arrive here? You know, how did you arrive at this place of evolution, of new understandings within yourself, and also in the community you serve? I know that, as part of your story, you grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana, or near New Orleans, and that, is my hometown. And even with the team being what it is right now, but it's gonna be all right. I am curious, really about who called you in, or who helped you to really actualize the hard work that it took to be this champion for social justice and anti-racism. Like, what do you recall as being the critical point where this happened for you?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I can kind of pinpoint like two very specific moments. I always say, like, I grew up in a household that was very typical of, oh, I just treat everyone kindly, treat everyone the way they want to be treated. I did grow up Jewish in Louisiana, and I went to public school, and I was one of the only Jewish families. And so I think I had a little bit of a taste of what it meant to be in a marginalized group, or have like experiences shaped by some part of my identity, obviously not to the same degree as other identity markers. I joined Teach for America after college. I had gone to school to be a teacher and then joined Teach for America and moved to New York. And that was the first time I ever had like a DEI conversation, right? Like a diversity and talking about privilege. And I think we did like the knapsack activity where you kind of like, check off the different privileges you carry. And that was very eye-opening. And I remember like calling my parents, just being like, what? Like, how have we never talked about this? And that kind of being my first, like, I always knew, but I didn't really know that it was like at such a macro level. Like, I always thought about racism as a more like interpersonal thing, and not like, oh, wow, like whether I want this privilege or not, I've got it because my skin color carries power in our country historically, like just straight up. And that was like an aha moment. And then, I became an educator. And, a lot of Teach for America's mission, good or bad, is right about addressing social justice and the academic achievement gap. And so I think I always went in knowing all my children were capable and that there were things in the communities that were keeping us from being successful, but not quite the level systemic oppression. And then when I became a school leader, my principal and I, Darlene, we would talk about how it felt like, how can we not talk about that all of our staff was white and all our children were Black and brown? And like, how could that not impact something? Not good, like good or bad, like it has to impact something. And then we had 2 teachers who came to us from different schools who finally like pulled us in the office and were like, hey, after my first year being here, like you guys like are really powerful and we know how much you love your kids and you talk about social justice, but like we haven't talked about anything like about the fact that like we're white and we're serving Black children, and about like how some of us might have savior complexes, and about how are we teaching kids? And we were like, oh yeah, because we were always kind of scared too. Like we always talked about it behind the door, but we never talked about it as a school. And they really helped us, be brave enough to start those conversations. And the very first time we had the conversation with our staff, like I literally remember it was at the end of year PD, because after these were end of year meetings that the teachers brought it up to us about, and we brought it up and we shared with them this anti-racist continuum for organizations. And we just asked the staff, where do you think we fall? And we broke people into groups, and it was fascinating because there were some groups who were like, oh, we're totally inclusive, multicultural, anti-racist. And then there were lots of groups that were like, we're on like -1. And then we ended up in the New York Post the very next day because someone didn't like the conversation we were having, and we were racist because we were talking about racism. And that's really when Darlene and I doubled down of like, if that's how some staff feel, even one, then that's even more reason why we have to have these conversations as a staff. And we have to look at what are we doing as a school that's harming children, or that we're doing intentionally or not. And so that really started our journey as a school and my personal journey. And I would say like, this is year like 7 or 8 of it, that really brought in us, we call it like addressing the 4 I's. So the institutionalized, the ideological, the interpersonal, and the internalized racism, and how as a school, we have to be working on all 4 of those at the same time. So we have to be working on ourselves, as well as breaking down the systems, as well as pushing up. And then also like digging into our ideology that we didn't even realize. And so I would say like, I'm so grateful for those 2 teachers who really pushed us to do what we know we needed to do, but we're like not brave enough to do on our own.
Wow. I do, if it's okay, I would love to follow up a little bit more. What was the work? Because one of the, I was reading a piece that you wrote in City Limits, and you talk about discomfort is a tiny ask, a very tiny ask for the sake of the well-being. And for me, what I feel like the soul of our young people. And I can't imagine what it means to be a white educator who's having to confront, racism and the systems and structures from a place where if you're always uncomfortable or you're continuing to experience discomfort, when do you feel like you have the ability to breathe, or you feel like, all right, we are making the right momentum, or we are making the right impact, despite how overwhelming I imagine it can feel? So I'm just kind of curious, and this kind of ties back to that trust piece. Someone had to trust you and others to go the journey. And so it first starts with you. So I'm curious to what was those conversations you had with yourself as you were consistently trying to move this work forward?
It was hard. It was a lot of talking to myself. It was a lot of Darlene and I. It was a lot. We started an equity team so that we weren't planning this on our own. And some of our teachers were actually helping us design and facilitate. So it really felt a little bit more collaborative. And they actually had a little bit more expertise than we had. Like they had experience in their other schools having some of these conversations. And so I think having a team was very helpful. I think we were always questioning, are we moving fast enough? Are we moving too fast? I think in reflection, I've gotten some good advice of this idea of like, we shouldn't move. I'm trying to remember how it was worded, but like we need to move faster than like the discomfort of the like most uncomfortable person, right? So we're not going to slow down because one person is really uncomfortable and fragile. Like our kids can't wait. Our own staff members of color honestly can't wait. Like harm is being done in our school to other staff members. Like we can't slow down. And then there's this one really powerful moment. We were working with Cardozi Jones, who was working with the NYU Metrocenter at the time. And we had a grant to work with them and they were supporting us in some of our work. And in one of the professional development sessions, one of our teachers raised their hand and they're like, so like, I get this and this is super important. But like, are you saying like, we literally have to question everything? Like now I'm questioning everything. Like I can't like go get breakfast or I can't make a decision in my classroom without questioning, like, am I doing this? Is this racist? Is this harmful? Like, this is so overwhelming. And his response was like, welcome what it feels like to be a Black man. And it was silent in the room. And I think for the first time, a lot of staff members, including myself, really realized the weight and the privilege that many of us carry daily that other people don't have the luxury of carrying. And so we're like, wow, if truly every decision I have to question, that's a lot. That means this stuff is real and this stuff is happening. And if we don't question it, we use the quote from Beverly Tatum of the moving walkway, right? And so imagine you're at the airport and you're on a moving walkway and racism's over here because that's like our school, like you're moving towards it because that's like the history of our country. It's so deeply embedded that if you're just standing there, you're moving along with it. And so to be anti-racist, you have to actually be actively walking the opposite way on the moving walkway. And like, I know like it's impossible to walk the opposite way for long on a moving walkway without being exhausted. And that was like a perfect analogy to me of what this work is. Like as an anti-racist educator, you're never done. It's never perfect. And you have to keep going and working really hard to go in the other direction.
One of the things, if I can ask you to expand upon, and I'd like to share a little piece here about that term anti-racist. I'm on my journey. I'm nowhere near as far as you in this learning and growing but I aspire to be. And one of the first things I needed to deconstruct is my idea of what it means to be racist. Because even as a former history teacher, early in my years, somebody who was racist was somebody who was wearing white clothes, part of the KKK, and actively doing harm to people with the intent to do harm. And I had to totally reframe my thinking about it towards what you said, and that it doesn't have to be intentional on my part. Just the act of going along with, well, this is the way things are done, or not questioning things, not interrupting them, is contributing to a racist act. And that if I'm not doing something, then I am contributing. And so that idea, and I think it was from White Fragility, that book, that I was listening to it in the car, and I just had like this like weight on me not in a bad way, in a good way, that like an acceptance of what that meant for me and what I needed to do differently moving forward. And it's still a work in progress. Can you talk a little bit about that term anti-racist and what it encompasses and what types of things that means that you're doing if you're actively walking on the walkway?
So I think that's a great question. And I think, in trainings that I've been at that really helped me conceptualize what racism is. I think I also similarly, it was literally growing up in New Orleans. My parents' first memory moving down there from New York was that the KKK was collecting money on the street corners for a fundraiser. And that was just like the norm, right? And so in my head, like that's what prejudice or racism looks like. It's a certain type of people. It's those people. It's not me. It's those people, right? Those are bad people. I'm good people. And so I think that when I first got introduced to that concept of the 4 eyes of oppression, starting with ideology being the biggest one, and understanding that like our country was literally built on ideology that groups of people were better than others, and understanding that when schools were first created, it was for white men. When banks were first created, it was for white men. When voting was first allowed, it was for white men. And that like all these things over time, other people got the rights slowly, but those systems never changed, right? We were just kind of like invited to join, but like the actual framework never changed. And so I think that understanding that like our country itself historically was founded on racist ideology was very important. Like I never fully, like I kind of knew that, but I didn't really know that. Like I was taught the history of who got voting rights when, but like we never used this like concept of like, right, because they thought certain people were better than other people or smarter or and so then understanding that then all these institutions were created, banks, medical care, schools, and they were created based on this ideology, which then impacts how we interact and then what we internalize about ourselves. And so I think when I started understanding how big this was, how like literally our nation was founded on this, it helped me understand that like I am one piece of this huge machine that is kind of reinforcing these systems that were created hundreds of years ago and honestly haven't changed much, right? And so therefore, like not only do I have to question what I do, I have to question everything that's ever been done in the system because the system was designed for one thing, and that wasn't for us to be successful or many of our students, both successful like in schools or in the world. And so I think that helped me kind of understand more what racism meant in our country and what it means to have to like work against it versus it just like to be a good person, right? And so I think that idea also of like good versus bad, like there is no good. We all are contributing to it. It's just like how much, right? And so no matter your race or your gender or any identity markers, we're contributing it because we're parts of systems that are harmful. And so how do we actively try to work against it? And that's why I go back to that quote by Dr. Beverly Tatum of The Walkway of like, there's no such thing as non-racist. There's only anti-racist. And it's a way of being. It's not a destination. Like you're never done.
Thank you. I appreciate that insight.
I am most heartened to be on this journey with you in any way. Sounds like there's been a lot of work you've been doing internally and externally. You're extending that love to other educators who are also trying to figure it out, are navigating a lot of questions within themselves. Maybe they don't have the wonderful team you have currently to do this work. And so I'm curious, what are your recommendations to educators who may feel like they're in a silo? Maybe they don't know whether or not they have people around them who also are on this journey and want to do this work with them, that it feels too tough and it's overwhelming, but they want to do something. What would be your recommendation on maybe the top, 2 or 3 things they could start doing or continue to do, because some people are still doing it?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think early in the beginning, like I talked about how like finding your people, and you'd be shocked at how many of my people I found through Twitter. And so these are not people I even know. Like they're people who like I like cross tweets with, who then like had like Twitter chats, and then we connected. And so I think about the folks from Clear the Air. I think about there's a lot. I want to be able to like quote them all, like Liberated Ed with Dina Simmons, who really did a lot of work with like social emotional learning and anti-racism. I think about EduColor, and then I was part of a working group in New York City of parents, organizers, educators who created a culture responsive education facilitators guide. And the idea is that there's 10 sessions. This guide is free for anyone. It's laid out so that you could use this with literally one other person. You could create a small group. You could literally use it for an entire staff PD. And it's takes everyone through kind of some learning experiences where you focus on the 4 I's, and each session thinks about the systems and yourself, and kind of create some protocols for discussion. And all of those sessions were designed by us who actually went through those experiences ourselves and found them super powerful. And so happy to share that to any community, but just knowing also that there's always someone else, right? There's always another teacher, there's always a family member or even a student who's passionate, and it's about finding them. And then I do honestly believe that most educators want to do right by kids. We might have different thoughts about what that looks like, but I do think that most people want to do right by kids. and want our kids to be successful, in quotes, and we all have different definitions of what success looks like and what it takes to get there. And so I think sometimes having some conversations of even breaking that down with your staff or your colleagues, what does it mean to be successful to you? Right. So some might be like, oh, to graduate college, cool. To me, like being successful is also like being a really good human who cares about other people. Like that's something I want school to do for students, or to feel seen. Some people for success might be that they have the skills that they need to like care for their family. Okay, cool. So I think starting having conversations where you start to hear from people what their beliefs are. And I think you will find some common ground to start with. And then I also think like norming on definitions, right? Like how many schools in their mission statements have something about equity? A lot. Or differentiation or these things, but we all have very different beliefs about what that means. And so how can you start having conversations? What does equity mean to you? What does equality mean to you? How are those different? Like, what is it we want for our kids and in our schools? And so I think there's so many incredible groups out there. You just kind of have to like look a little bit for them. But also knowing that there's a lot of great organizations giving out free resources, free professional development. I know there's like a culture responsive education scorecard where any PTA or family or educators can be trained in how to look at their curriculum to see where does it fall and what kind of steps you can do. So you might just have one person, but get started. And then maybe the next year you have two. And then the next year you've got four. And maybe it's like some members of your PTA get involved. And so knowing like it's okay to start small. And it's going to be a lifelong journey. Like your school will never be there and you won't either, but you got to just get started and keep going.
Thank you.
I appreciate that you brought up the scorecard. And as always, we're going to link to all of these resources that you're talking about. And I think in particular, it really takes a look at STEM, but it is something that can be transferable to social studies, to ELA, because you're looking at representation in the books. You're looking at are facts being presented, or is it a version of what happened? Like talking about people who emigrated from Africa to the United States. I'm like, people didn't really immigrate from Africa. They were taken from Africa and brought here. So like what words are we using when we're describing what actually happened in history versus how we're trying to kind of ease it, and kind of cover it over a little bit. And I think that in looking through your educator's guide, there's a tremendous amount of resources in there, from videos to articles. And I really like how you've put in protocols for people to have a foundation to learn about having safe conversations and brave conversations where people are feeling that they can have their voice heard, but they can also hear other people's perspectives at the same time. And those are huge SEL skills that I don't think are necessarily modeled in today's society for our youth.
Yeah, and I think what we really try to be intentional about, and I think that we learned over time, was that culture responsive education is not just content. It's not just what you teach. It's pedagogy. It's how you teach. And so we really wanted to include protocols that you could also use with children, right? Like equity of voice is equity. Think about how many staff meetings where you hear the same three people and other people's voices aren't heard. And so how do you put protocols in themselves can actually be a tool to create equity of voice and to hear from voices you don't hear from as often for lots of different reasons. And so I think the guide does a really good job of kind of like setting up a progression, although any one of those sessions could also be like 10 other, sessions or things you could do with schools. When we first started, we literally started off by looking at our school standards and just noticing what's there and what isn't. And just that was really eye-opening because at first we couldn't do that very well. We knew what was there. It was really hard to understand which voices were missing in New York history or in second grade family unit, right? Or in the role in the first grade unit on community helpers, which talks about police and firemen. And so we really had to sit with it and be like, what's missing here? What's harmful here that we're not even like noticing? And then the next year, it grew and grew. And then we did a lot of work with Zaretta Hammond's Culture Responsive Teaching in the Brain and Dr. Goldie Muhammad's work of understanding that like, this is not just the what, it's not just replacing the books in your library. It's all the other stuff. How you teach the classroom environment, the kids feeling safe. We shifted from our kids having roles to them having rights and knowing in kindergarten what their rights are and how do we use rights to create a community of care in a classroom and in a school. So it's like, it's literally like a lens you put on everything. It's not just this like add on top, like, let me write my lesson and now let me add the culture responsive thing in there. Right. And so it's a lot, but it's really awesome and exciting.
May I ask one more question? Because I feel Craig gearing up and I know it's coming.
I'm like, y'all can duke it out. No, I'm kidding.
You mentioned culturally responsive sustaining. And I know that we talk that over time, as we learn more and things evolve, scholars build upon each other to expand the work. And I know that you had mentioned earlier about, I treat all students equally. And I remember learning that in my undergrad, like that's what we wanted. And I truly thought that was good. And then coming to realize that I want to honor all of my students equitably and understanding that they're all coming to our space with different backgrounds and different experiences. And then also learning about culturally relevant pedagogy, and then it was culturally responsive and culturally sustaining. And could you talk a little bit about that evolution and where we're at right now with the name of the Facilitator's Guide and what that means in practice for us as educators?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a lot of misconceptions when it comes to culture responsive education. So I think some people think it means teaching culture and that we have to be experts on every culture and that we have to include every culture in every one of our lessons. I think some people think it's like something you do after. And so I think truly understanding what culture responsive education and sustaining education is it's really finding spaces and places in our curriculum for our students to tell us who they are, not for us to assume who they are, for them to tell us. And when you really think about it like that, there's so many tweaks that you could quickly look at in a lesson to be like, where's there an opportunity for someone to tell us who they are? And I can think of this example that Jodi had shared with us when we first started. And we were like, what does this look like? And he talked about a science teacher doing a lesson on cells. And he's talking about the nucleus, which is like the powerhouse. And he asked every kid to tell us what's the nucleus in your community? Like, where do you go for information? And some kids are talking about the bodega. Some people are talking about their church. Some people are talking about the street corner. And like, that was just the ignite, as Loretta would call it, like this moment for kids to connect to the content. It was this one little tweak that gave kids an opportunity to tell us who they were, not us assume, and for them to connect to the content. And so I think understanding what it is really important and what it is not. And then I think like from what we've talked about all along, this idea of sustaining is like, it's got to keep going. So it's not just that one ignite that I just did. How am I providing lots of different ways for kids to tell me who they are? And that comes, we start off talking about the SEL, the social emotional learning, right? Like those skills in itself are important. And I remember when we started bringing them in schools, like it did make a big difference on its own. But then when we realized, like, if I'm only teaching a child to be mad and when they're mad to like take deep breaths, but I'm not really ever addressing the root of why they're mad, and it's because something's unjust, then what are we doing this for? Yes. And so that goes to this idea for me that sustaining means it lives and breathes everywhere. Everywhere. It lives in your curriculum. It lives in your policies. It lives in how you teach kids to repair from a behavior incident or learn from it. It lives in your social emotional curriculum. It lives in your uniform and homework policy. Like it literally lives everywhere. And that's what it means to sustain, right? It's living and breathing. And so I really appreciate the shift of that word. Because responsive sometimes feels like, oh, I'm doing this as a response to something. But really what we're doing is sustaining. We're doing it.
Thank you.
Well, I am a flame just in listening to you talk about sustaining practices versus responsive practices. And I really want to double click on, you said it breathes everywhere. It sustains everywhere. And it stays with our young people everywhere. And I got an email via LinkedIn from one of my former fifth graders who reached out to me And we've been having an on again, off again conversation on LinkedIn for the last 9 months. And he took the courage to actually have a video chat with me last week. And he talked about how important it was that he found his voice in my class through poetry, and that I brought him to my alma mater, Leslie University, just as an opportunity for my young people to see, like, this is a possible for you. Like, this is a place you belong to. And taking fifth graders to a university campus where they had an opportunity to see and experience things. And now to get it full circle, I didn't know that that was a sustaining practice, like that was going to stay with him. And what he shared was, you thought of me even when I wasn't thinking of myself, and how powerful that is. And so I would hate for us to close out the conversation without talking about the young people you serve. And I'm curious, what are you most excited about that you're seeing happening throughout your building that is centered on this work that you lead every day?
Yeah. And so, like, you just made me think of so many things. I need to just focus my brain for a second. I love teaching fifth grade. That was my favorite. And my fifth graders are in college now too, some of them. But it made me think, like, I want to be really clear that, like, STAR, which is the name of my school, like, we're evolving. Like, we're still not perfect, and we never will be. So on any given day, like, if you, at the end of the day, I can name things we did that day that were like, oh, that's not aligned with what we wanted to be or who we wanted to be. And so I just want to be really clear that, like, we're still in that place. But when I think about young people and I think about the shift in our school over the past 7 years, it is super powerful to walk into a kindergarten classroom and hear a student say to another child, I have the right to learn and you're interrupting me. Or for them to read aloud about a boy wearing a dress, and they literally say, he has the right to be whoever he wants to be because you have the right to be you. And so that's when I'm like, okay, so this stuff matters. And the kids have got it, right? The kids have they've got everything they need. We're the ones getting in the way of everything. And so creating places where kids can just be the beautiful humans that they're born being, I think is really important. And then also it was interesting to think about, like, where are the places and spaces where kids are telling us? So, like, if we say we value student voice, we value kids being joyful about school. When I'm designing my school's comprehensive educational plan, how am I measuring that? Because I have 20 ways to measure if they're good readers. How am I measuring if they love school? And so, like, 3 years ago, we came up with a student survey that all kids in kindergarten through fifth grade get three times a year. Like, 4 questions. How do you feel about reading? Like, do you look forward to it? How do you feel as a mathematician? Do you feel like you can stand up and advocate for yourself and others? And do you feel like you have the tools to handle if you're having a hard time? And when we actually started measuring those things, right? Because you put time and energy towards what you measure and what you want to see progress in. And so when we started valuing that the same way we did their academic scores, that was pretty darn powerful. And when we have a data meeting with the classroom and we're looking at their data and they're triangulating, how is the student doing in reading? How often do they check out books from the library? How do they love reading, or what do they not love? And we come at it from all those different angles. You can guarantee that our interventions and our responses are very different than what they were before.
I think a lot of that, from what I'm hearing, is because you're seeing them as a whole person. Their likes, their dislikes, their assets, what they're bringing to the table, their passions, their joys, and not just looking at it from a curriculum content point of view, which I think is really empowering for the students to be seen. We mentioned that before, for who they are.
Yeah, and I think Dr. Goldie Muhammad really pushes that work around joy, right, and identity. And one huge concern for mine not after the pandemic, because it's still going, but is this idea that with such a focus on learning loss, that the focus is so much on academics that a lot of the joy is lost. And that's something we still struggle with. How do we balance those both? Yeah, we know kids need time to read. Yeah, we know they might need some response to intervention in small groups, and they still need choice time, and they still need recess time, and they still need project time. And, like, how are we ensuring that, like, the goal of joy is actually, like, a goal for the school that's just as important as our children's reading or math scores?
One of the other pieces that really just resonated with me too, that you said, and you were very intentional in saying that your school is not, and I'm going to paraphrase, like perfect. You're on this journey. And I think that that desire to not want to mess up is what sometimes might keep people from wanting to engage in the work. But we're human beings who are going to make mistakes. And I'd rather, I guess, as they say, like fail forward, like I'd rather engage in those conversations and at least fumble my way through it and be called in by people who care about me than to not ever engage at all. Right.
Yeah. And that like requires like being brave and committed. Right. And like, if anyone thinks here that I have not caused harm or made like major mistakes, like anyone is welcome to email me outside of this. And when you're having a hard day, be like, I can't believe I did this, even though I'm trying so hard to be anti-racist. Like, I'm happy to share stories that like, you're going to mess up and you're going to cause harm. And you actually probably already are. You just didn't know it. Right. Like, we're already causing harm in our systems and our behavior. We just didn't know it. And so, I think you have to be committed to just doing it. And what's interesting too is like, when I think about who we started with 7 years ago, our staff, most people stayed. Right. And so it's not like this was so scary that like we're jumping ship. Like, it was like, this is scary. And I think this really is important. And like, how do we go through these growing pains together? And, I think that was like nice to see that the people who were here wanted to be here and they were in it, even if they didn't know what it looked like yet, or even if they, knew it was going to be really hard and uncomfortable.
I think that speaks a lot to your leadership and to your colleagues' leadership too, in embarking on that with people and giving them grace as they're growing and learning. Thank you.
Yeah. So as we come to a close, because we could continue this conversation for endless hours. One of the great questions that comes up, there's many, but one I'm curious to is, what do you believe is your superpower? And because I generally we would say, what is your SEL superpower? But I feel like you have so many more. I'm curious, what do you consider to be your superpower these days?
That's such a hard question.
He comes at them just like,
I know.
And I
like,
knew
like lots of thoughts.
I should have warned you ahead of time, but
yeah. So, okay, I think my school superhero, or I think my life is like, I'm an empath for the good and the bad, right? I feel it all. And sometimes so much that it can be like debilitating or, put me in therapy and all that good stuff, but who doesn't need therapy? But I think as a school leader, being an empath is very helpful in many ways, because I really try to see any situation from other perspectives, and like everything that goes down, like I take to heart, which once again is a superpower and then also probably a challenge. But I do think that helps make connection, and helps for my staff and my families just to feel heard, and to try to do as much as I can to truly make their work easier. So I think that's one. And then my non-school superpower was like, I know all the words to like every juvenile rap song, growing up in the South, and like every Dirty Dog rap song, just because that's like what I grew up on. So like people are always very surprised and shocked for those words to come out of my mouth. But I have to say, like, I'm very proud of that superpower as well.
All right now.
That one might get edited out, but I just felt like I had to share.
We're not editing that out.
No, I can't wait till we all get together at another conference.
Yes. My wedding song was like our first dance song was to, Juveniles Back That Up. And the wedding band was like, are you sure you want us to play this? This is really dirty. Like, and we were like, no, we do. Thank you. But I think that's a perfect example of us like showing up for our true selves, right? And like everyone has multifacets to their identity, and that's what makes us beautiful and fun and human.
Wow. Well, where can folks connect with you? Because I mean, like after that, and knowing that Juvenile, that wonderful NOLA-based rapper, is part of your streaming. I'm sure folks might be curious to connect with you. So how can they?
Sure. So on Twitter, my handle is NYC Ed the number 4 equity, or happy to always share my email, which is just my name here. So jodi.friedman@gmail. I have met so many people who've extended grace and like shared ideas with me. So I'm always happy to talk, chat. If you haven't found your people, I'm happy to be one of your people. And also to share that guide with you. So please like reach out. I love connecting with others.
Thank you. And is it okay that I link the guide to the podcast as resources?
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Thank you. I think the more people we can get it into the hands of, the better.
Yes, that would be great.
Well, Jodi,
It's away.
Yeah.
Well, Jodi, there's another part that's coming.
Well, Jodi, it has been an incredible pleasure. We're so glad you joined us for SEL and EDU, our podcast. We are excited that so many other educators and leaders, and even parents and community partners who are really listening to us across the globe, have an opportunity to lean in and feel like their bucket was filled today. There's one thing I'm sure that folks can take away from today's podcast. So we're so grateful for you joining us today.
Thanks. And thanks for sharing your space with me. This was a lot of fun.
Thank
we
you.
do all right. We do all right.
Back again to do like a part 2.
Sure, whatever.
Absolutely. All right. Well, SEL and EDU family, we're so excited that we had Jodi Friedman here. It's Krista and I. We will continue this journey again, and we're going to continue to find new places and spaces close to you. We just hope that as you take this journey on, that you hold dear and hold tight, but you also stand in the light. Y'all take care.